Hello YouTube, this is Mandak coming at you with another Guardians of the Galaxy podcast. Today's podcast is Guardians of the Galaxy Tomorrow's Avengers Volume 2. So again, Sunday night, don't know how many people are tuned into this, but regardless, I'm going to continue on with my marathon of reading Guardians of the Galaxy. I actually cracked open Jim Valentino Volume 1 Guardians of the Galaxy today. I read the first issue, already fallen in love with it, so really excited to talk about that. Hopefully next week. I'm going to try to keep these coming out on a regular schedule. But anyway, before we get to that, though, we want to talk today about Guardians of the Galaxy Tomorrow's Avengers Volume 2. Now, as I mentioned in my previous podcast, these two collections are kind of a mosh posh of different things in terms of the contents. When you look at them, they're not really consistent in terms of whatever. There's no ongoing series still at this point. In this collection, we kind of jump forward a few years to 1978 and 1979 with a lot of Avengers stuff, as well as some Marvel Team Up and Marvel 2-in-1 stuff. So going back to that as well. So we'll get to all that stuff today. Just to go over some details of what's in the collection. This collection is 376 pages. I got through it in less than a week, I think, or actually probably around a week. I started reading it this time last week, so it took me about a week to get through. We're getting into the late 70s, early 80s. Actually, I don't think we're in the 80s yet here, but we're in the late 70s, so the writing's getting a little bit better. Not as thick with the narration, all that stuff. So pretty good. This book collects Thor Annual number 6, Avengers 167 to 168, as well as 170 through 177, and issue 181. And Miss Marvel number 23, Marvel Team Up number 86, as well as Marvel 2-in-1 numbers 61 through 63, and number 69. So just to go over the contents real quick, Thor Annual is kind of like a prelude to the Korvac saga. All the Avengers issues are pretty much exactly the same contents you would see in a Korvac saga paperback or hardcover, whatever you prefer to get. Issue 181 kind of just wraps up a little bit about the Avengers and their state at that point. I really can't understand why it's in this collection, and we'll talk about it as we go along here, but it's kind of like not related at all to the Guardians, I don't think. Well, actually, a little bit. They're in it, but that's pretty much it. We'll get to that. Miss Marvel, some pretty good stuff going on there. Marvel Team Up, and then you have Marvel 2-in-1, which, we saw some 2-in-1 issues back in the first volume of Tomorrow's Avengers, so the Thing showing up again and kind of being relevant for the Guardians is something that is reoccurring in the early stories of the Guardians. So those are the contents. Like I said, 376 pages, pretty good sized paperback. Overall, I really enjoyed this. There's some complaints I have with the Avengers stuff, which I'll get to as we go along here, but you have the writers here, Roger Stern. I don't know, I think he might have written the Thor Annual. I think that's why he probably gets the first credit, because I think it's by appearance. You have Jim Shooter doing all the Avengers issues. Jim Shooter's run goes back to I think issue 140, probably earlier than that. I read his stuff with Serpent Crown, the Final Threat Epic Collection, which collects all of his Shooter stuff. The redeeming quality with that run is that George Perez does the pencils, which makes the story a lot better because Jim Shooter loves narration, loves dialogue for some reason. It's not a bad thing, but it kind of can hurt the story sometimes. David Michelini does issue 181 of Avengers, which I could definitely notice a difference between the two when I got to that. Chris Claremont is doing the Marvel Team Up issue. He was doing Marvel Team Up, pretty lengthy run during that time. This is, I think, a few years into his Uncanny X-Men run, which started in 1975 with, the all-new X-Men after Giant Size. And then you have Mark Grunwald doing the Marvel 2-in-1, which I think kind of ran alongside his Captain America run. I don't know if maybe it was beforehand. I've read some Mark Grunwald stuff. I've yet to read his Captain America stuff, but I've read some of his Quasar stuff. And one thing that kind of bothers me a little bit about him is that he loves giant bubbles of text, which is not bad, but it took me a while to get through. That's why it kind of took me a little bit longer than I should. But yeah, so those are all the writers. So looking at them, lined up here, you have some pretty good talent on this book. It's not like some random, writers that aren't really familiar. I mean, Jim Shooter, Roger Stern, Chris Claremont, they're all seasoned, writers. Not at this point, obviously, but as we go along, they're pretty good. And then you have artists, a lot of them trickling over from the first book. Sal Buscema, George Perez is doing the majority of the Avengers issues, and then you have John Byrne, on some of the issues. I can't remember which ones he drew, but yeah. So just to sit back and talk about what this collection contains. So in the first one, we talked about how we got the origin of the characters. We had this whole side plot with the Guardians going back and teaming up with the Thing and Captain America, and then you had them teaming up with the Defenders in the future to rid the future of the Badoon, and that was successful. And then you have the Marvel Presents stuff, where you have a bunch of different storylines with the Topographical Man, and we're introduced to Nikki and all these other characters. So there wasn't really a central storyline to that collection. There's a bunch of different things, which is not bad. I enjoyed it. I still thought it was really great. But with this one, you kind of have a little bit more focused in storyline that kind of everything kind of fits together. So like I was mentioning earlier, the main central storyline within this whole book is the Korvac saga. And when I bought this book, I originally owned the Korvac saga in a paperback form. When I saw the contents for this one, when I was looking to buy it, I realized that there was the exact same contents as the Korvac saga. So I ended up selling that to somebody in lieu for getting it on here. So you have the Korvac saga. Then you have a bunch of stuff that kind of wraps up and puts that into a nice bow. A lot of stuff with Vance Astra, which we'll get into as we go along here. And then you have a side quest with this character named Her, and her relationship with Adam Warlock. So I'll get into all that as we go along here. I'll try to, we're already on 8 minutes now, and I'll try to get into that as we go along. Just some last minute things, and I'll jump right into the first issue we have here in this collection. You can collect this in a few different formats, like I mentioned before. You can get it in trade paperback form, which I own. Just go into Amazon, search Guardians of the Galaxy, Tomorrow's Avengers, Volume 2. You'll see a cover with it's the cover, I think, of Avengers number 167, where you have the Beast just landing a haymaker to Charlie 27, which I always thought was pretty cool. It's a pretty busy cover, though, I'll say. You can also, if you're just looking to read the Korvac saga, you don't really care a lot about the Guardian stuff, which I'm not going to force on anybody. You can get the Korvac saga in paperback format. I'm pretty sure there's a Marvel Premiere Classic for it too, like a standard hardcover you can get as well. So if you want to go all fancy, by all means, go get that. If you want to wait, there is a Guardians of the Galaxy Tomorrow's Heroes omnibus coming out. That's going to collect all the material in this volume as well as the first one, which I mentioned in my first podcast. So, have a few formats here. For me, I think the trade paperbacks are nice because, if you look at them on the shelf, they all line up, not just these ones, but, the next ones with Jim Valentino's we'll go into later, and the in the year 3000 Guardian stuff, which is later on even. And they all kind of really have the same trade dress, match up nice on the shelf, so that's the route I went. But without further ado, let's jump into, the synopsis of this whole, book here, and obviously I'll go along here. I've done a little bit more preparation this time. I kind of highlighted some things I want to touch on, so we'll get into it. So settle in. If you're first time listener, it's probably going to be about an hour and a half of information. So buckle up and we'll get started. Like I always do, brought back the water, so we'll take a quick sip and then we'll get started. So, like I said, the first issue we start off with is Thor Annual number 6, and we open up to Thor fighting some terrorists when he's accidentally transported to the 31st century, which we all know is where the Guardians of the Galaxy currently live. Unlike the movie, the Guardians live in the future versus the present with all the other heroes. So he meets up with the Guardians of the Galaxy, who are, the reason why he was transported is I think Korvac, which we're introduced to in this in this issue, is trying to steal this technology from the past to, I guess, power himself and take over the world in the future, or I think to go back in the past and take over it, whatever. It is here where Thor is transported and meets the Guardians of the Galaxy, and basically the rest of the issue is Thor teaming up with the Guardians to take down Korvac and his minions of menace, that he calls them. And they have a bunch of weird names. I'm not going to go into them that much because they're pretty much one and done. Like, they're not really significant characters. I don't know if they really ever show up again in the Marvel Universe, but they're really weird. Like, one of them has like these antlers that like I think like Nikki shoots off, and like he's like I can't fight anymore because I guess he relied on the antlers. Anyway, so at the end of the thing, Korvac gets away. And I think we don't actually see him die. We see him be transported away somewhere. So the Guardian's like, where did he go? And just to sit back and talk a little bit more about who Korvac is. Korvac was a scientist who actually worked with the Brotherhood of the Badoon. I think creating weapons and other types of machinery for the Badoon Brotherhood. And I think they saw that he might have tried to turn on them. So I think they made something, they hot-wired something that would blow up and, severely damaged Korvac and turned him into a cyborg from the waist down. And you see that in this issue. Korvac is pretty much like a human from the waist up, but his body is completely it's like a big rectangular prism that is has buttons and shit like that. He floats around on. So it was a little weird. So basically at the end of this issue, you have Korvac, kind of the people who stopped him, who ultimately led to his destruction, his downfall, were the Guardians. So he kind of escapes and knows now that the Guardians are the people that are standing his way from taking over this century, this era of time that he's in right now. So that's kind of where that issue ends. Just one thing to talk about too with this issue is this is still the late 1970s for Thor, and I don't know if this was Stern writing or whatever, but whoever was writing, they really laid on the Asgardian speech really thick in this book. There's a lot of times where I really had to sit back and be like, what did Thor mean by that? And that's all up to interpretation. Sometimes, some writers will make him sound a lot more, Asgardian, or have a certain speech compared to others who might have him speak a lot more like us, as humans and stuff like that, or I guess Americans, whatever. Same thing goes for Hercules. I've seen that done a lot with him. So anyway, we'll jump into the next issue, which is Avengers 167. So after we have Thor Annual number 6, we get into the Korvac saga proper, and just to sit back before I talk about this, and we'll go into some more detail. The Korvac saga, to me at least, feels like a giant roundabout thing that just culminates in Korvac. There's a lot of side stories that happen in this saga, if you will, that kind of detract from the whole momentum and build-up of facing Korvac. And I don't know if it kind of hinders the story for me. We have a side plot with Ultron and Jocasta for no reason at all. And then we get into a whole thing with the Collector, which, the Collector one has a little bit more of an excuse because it's part of the story, but the Ultron one just made no sense. So we'll get into that. So issue 167, we open to the Avengers being alerted by S.H.I.E.L.D. at a gigantic space station, which, if you've read the first collection, you know that it's dry dock, which we actually got a little bit of an introduction to last collection. I think it was the last issue in that book, Marvel Presents number 12, where we had the Guardians boarding that dry dock to tend to the injuries that Starhawk suffered from his father. And we got a nice story with Charlie 27, a lot more character development with him, and all that stuff. So at this point, the Guardians have taken over Dry Dock as like their space station, their like hub of operation, and they basically traveled here from Earth to warn the Avengers about Korvac, who they subsequently beat in the future, but they realized that he kind of didn't die, that he might have came back to the past because of being defeated by the Guardians. He wanted to go back and make sure the Guardians never existed, and the way that could happen is if they killed their leader, Vance Astro, who we know is the 20th century astronaut who lived for 1,000 years, was transported through space to the 31st century, where he emerged encapsulated in a copper suit that wouldn't make him age. So Korvac's plan is to come back to the past and kill Vance Astro as a boy in the 1970s before he can become an astronaut, discover the Guardians of the Galaxy and all that stuff. So the Guardians have come back and are kind of like pretty much for this whole duration are basically playing babysitter to the boy Vance Astro on Earth. And another thing that kind of sucks too is Vance Astro as the character from the 31st century. He cannot go onto Earth. He has to stay on Dry Dock so that there's no disruption with the time stream. And we've seen this happen in the last collection, with Vance going to Earth while his boy version of himself was still on Earth. So we've seen why this can't happen and why he had to stay behind. So we have like a little fight with the Guardians and the Avengers because the Avengers go up to the space station. They see the Guardians. Some of them don't know who they are. The only people who jump in and tell them that these people are friends is Thor and Captain America, which we knew that Thor just saw them back in the last issue, and Captain America fought with them to liberate New York City of the Badoon rule back in I think like a Marvel 2-in-1 issue in the first volume. So we have that whole storyline going on, and pretty much the Guardians tell them about what's happening. Back on Earth though, we have Janet Pym hosting Janet Pym, because Janet Van Dyne's married at this point to Hank Pym. She's hosting a fashion show when the Porcupine comes in and starts a fight with the Wasp, Yellow Jacket, and Nighthawk, who is actually a Defender who we saw in the first collection. He's in the audience, and he actually starts fighting with the Wasp and Yellow Jacket and helping them out. Porcupine is a very old Marvel villain dating back to the Tales to Astonish stuff with Ant-Man and the Wasp. I've read that stuff. Porcupine as a villain, though, very one-dimensional, not a really great villain, but the biggest thing to take away here is that we have one of the models called Karina Walters at the end of this issue being approached by this mysterious man that was in the audience during this fashion show, and they both vanish for some random reason. So that kind of leaves you a little bit of a cliffhanger, like what's going on here. So that transitions into Avengers 168. The Avengers come back from space after talking with the Guardians about what was happening with Korvac, and when they walk in, they realize that someone has invaded the mansion. They're like, who's in this building? Who could it possibly be? Is it one of our villains come to hijack us and destroy us? Little do they know that it's actually Henry Gyrick. I think that's what it is. Henry Gyrick is a character that shows up in here. Obviously, if you've watched the 90s X-Men stuff, X-Men TV show, I think he's in there. I think that's the same character. But he is a National Security Council person. He's the one who kind of gives governmental access to the Avengers, and he's kind of pissed because he's like, you guys left your can't talk. You guys left your defenses down. Anyone could have just strolled right in here to Avengers Mansion and just stole any governmental information. So he's a little pissed off about that, and this starts to trickle over into the storyline. It doesn't really affect it in a huge way. It's just a little stupid thing that we'll get to later. But as the Avengers and Guardians talk about what's going on, how they're going to protect Vance from being attacked by Korvac, Starhawk, because he's the one who knows, it basically just he kind of does his own thing. Not just in this book, but in subsequent books and books previous. He kind of just does his own thing without telling the other Guardian stuff. So he sneaks out and goes, in his other form as Aletta, because they can kind of change bodies. Aletta being his wife. He slips out and actually is able to find Korvac living in this residential neighborhood in Forest Hills, New York. And he goes by the name Michael. So, and he's chilling with this Karina girl, who we find out. So that was pretty much the mysterious person from issue 167. Michael and Karina are kind of living by themselves, just doing their own thing, until Starhawk shows up and tries fighting Michael, who we know is Korvac. Michael easily destroys him, but instead of actually just killing him, he actually recreates Starhawk and gives him no memory of what happened with this battle. The reason being is because if Starhawk end up missing or end up being killed or whatever, that could lead the Avengers and the Guardians to where Korvac was being. And Korvac wasn't really intending on fighting the Avengers, coming to Earth and making a lot of noise. He kind of just wanted to do his own thing on Earth, which we'll find out more about his intentions later as we go along here. Avengers 170 opens up with, we have, so this kind of transitions into the next part of the storyline. So at this point in Avengers history, Hawkeye is chilling with Two Gun Kid out in somewhere out in the Southwest at somewhere. I can't, for the life of me, I cannot remember what happened. I think it's because Hawkeye transported back through time, and then he came, and then Two Gun Kid wanted to come back with him through time. Two Gun Kid being a Golden Age character from Marvel's pre-superhero age stuff. So at this point, I think Hawkeye and Two Gun Kid are coming back to help the Avengers for some reason, and the Two Gun Kid and Hawkeye are just chilling out there on a train or whatever, and Two Gun Kid actually disappears for some reason. Quicksilver is chilling with the Inhumans and I think his wife at the time, Crystal, and he also vanishes in the midair. And that kind of sets the stage for what's to follow here. Thor is appearing and disappearing for no random reason. I don't know why it's mentioned in here, but he just does that. And while the Avengers are trying to help the Guardians, they actually get the body of Jocasta back to their mansion, naturally for Hank Pym to look over to kind of figure out, okay, what's going on here. And this was the storyline from Bride of Ultron, Ultron resurrecting Jocasta's body through Janet Van Dyne's brainwaves, which is a little bit Oedipus Rex kind of, with the whole wanting to marry his mom, which is really weird. But as they're getting Jocasta back, she actually comes back to life and fights the Avengers to a standstill. And instead of, when Iron Man and Captain America show up, instead of commanding the Avengers to kill Jocasta and try to destroy her, they actually let her escape because they're like, you know what, Ultron is definitely behind this, so let's just let her escape and then we'll follow her to wherever she's going, which bleeds into the next issue, Avengers 171, where we get the Jocasta going to this coven, with all these nuns and shit, and the Avengers obviously follow her. Miss Marvel comes along for the ride. At this point, Carol Danvers is Miss Marvel, and the Beast, being one of the Avengers, actually convinces this sister Eucalypta to let them into the coven, where they actually run into Ultron. But during this time, though, Scarlet Witch actually disappears into a maze of mirrors and is attacked by this sister Eucalypta, who actually ends up being just a robot. This whole story, I'm really trying hard to sell it as a good story, but it's really, in terms of the Ultron stuff, it's really, really stupid. And I really can't understand why this was in the Korvac saga in the first place. I mean, there's no real implications with it other than the fact that Ultron gets defeated. He tries to get Ultron in this issue tries to get Jocasta to marry him at last after been taken away from her and all that stuff. but she ends up turning on Ultron. And we see this going forward. Jocasta will be an ally to the Avengers rather than an enemy. And at the end, after the battle has been won, after Scarlet Witch has used her hex powers and Thor has used his hammer to siphon off the power from Ultron and send it into space, the end result of this whole issue is that Jocasta and Captain America mysteriously vanish. So, last issue we had Two Gun Kid and Quicksilver vanish. This issue we have Jocasta and Captain America vanishing. So, it's a little, all the Avengers are kind of dumbfounded about what's happening here. Like, why are all these characters just vanishing? So, issue 172 of Avengers has Hawkeye coming back to Avengers Mansion. And the reason why is because, of what happened with Two Gun Kid. He's kind of like, okay, what happened here? Why did he disappear? I should probably go back and see what the Avengers are doing. So he does. He, ends up entering into the mansion, but realizes no one's home. And that's because they're all at this coven, trying to take down Ultron. So he walks in, starts looking around, and he leaves the door open. And little does he know, Henry Gyrick comes in through the door, and he's pissed off because he's like, what the hell? I just talked to these guys about, security stuff and making sure that their mansion is not, no one is intruding in their mansion. And, the Avengers come back to the mansion after defeating Ultron, but still confused about why Jocasta and Captain America disappeared. And, they find Hawkeye, and they're like, oh, Hawkeye, it's so great to have you back. And he's like, yeah, I took care of this dude that just came into our mansion. And little do they know that intruder was Henry Gyrick. So you can understand that at this point, Gyrick is pretty much revoking all of the security clearances and privileges for the Avengers. He sees that they are not ready for this at all. So that kind of sucks. Because of that, the Avengers actually lose the ability to use Quinjets. They lose the ability to scan for people. They're really hindered in terms of their ability to run their missions. So, that really puts a damper on everything. At the same time as this is happening, though, Crystal, Pietro's wife, calls him to tell him that Pietro has vanished, and that kind of puts the Avengers more into the mindset of, okay, why is everyone just disappearing? So, and at the same time this happens, they find out that Tyrak is actually attacking the harbor of New York. So I think Tyrak is actually like an Atlantean or an undersea creature. So Iron Man, being the leader at this point, the chairman, whatever you want to call it, he actually sends a few different groups over, because there's so many things going on at this point, like I just mentioned. So he kind of splits up the teams. At this point there's a lot of people in the Avengers Mansion. So he kind of just splits up the team. He sends Vision, Scarlet Witch, Wonder Man, Hawkeye, and Miss Marvel to the harbor to take care of Tyrak, whatever the hell he's doing. Janet and Hank Pym go to the phones to call in any other former Avengers that they can get a hold of to kind of figure out, okay, why is everyone disappearing? Thor and Beast are a backup team, which actually they end up doing stupid shit. They end up doing their own side quests, which kind of pisses off Iron Man because he's like, you guys are supposed to be here to protect the mansion. And then Iron Man goes to the lab to work on the disappearances and figure out what's going on. Because Tony's kind of wants to tap into his own Stark stuff and see, okay, what's going on here. Maybe I can use it since whatever. I think at one point he actually tries getting into the Stark security stuff, and then Nick Fury's like, yeah, since you lost your clearances with the government, that also includes S.H.I.E.L.D., so you're on your own, buddy. And he's like, that sucks. So, the team that goes to fight Tyrak, they end up beating the shit out of him, but they don't have any Quinjet to bring him back in, so they end up just throwing him in the water, and it's like, okay, let's just get out of here. That really doesn't get resolved in any good way. I think Tyrak ends up just going back to wherever the hell he came from, because he got the shit beat out of him so much by the team that fought him. So back at the mansion, though, we have Hank and Jan getting a hold of Black Panther, Hercules, the Wizard, an old Golden Age Marvel creation, and Captain Marvel, who's Marvel at this point. He's not dead yet. And that's pretty much that. So, in the meantime, we see a cameo of a of the villain who has kidnapped the Avengers, kind of monologuing and talking about it, but we don't actually get to see who it is. So let me take a little break here. I know I'm keeping you guys on the edge of your seats here with this whole disappearance of Avengers stuff, but we'll get to it as I go along here. So, getting into the tail end of the Korvac saga, which, at this point you're kind of forgetting about Korvac, right? Because I'm talking about Ultron, I'm talking about this, disappearance thing. So issue 173, we have Iron Man recruiting Captain Marvel, BP, Wizard, Hercules, and the Black Widow for some reason. Oh, actually, I think I remember Hercules and Black Widow actually, at this point, are part of the Champions team, and they actually end up flying in from, I think they were based out of somewhere in the Southwest. They end up flying in and, in a plane, and Hercules is, dicking around, and Black Widow's whatever. So I think I actually remember them hijacking a helicopter, or Hercules got pissed off and threw a helicopter or something. It was really funny. So elsewhere, Korvac is still chilling on Earth, kind of just thinking about what's going on. He's also really considering that considering the fact that he's from the future and he came back to the past. He's thinking about because he's really big about not being discovered by the Avengers. He hasn't really attacked anyone yet. So he actually can look into different celestial beings and see what's going on, and nobody knows that he exists in that time period yet. No one knows of his whereabouts, including the Guardians. He can see the Guardians are still protecting Vance, so he really can't jump out and kill him, nor is that even his intention at this point, I don't think. So back at the mansion, we have the Avengers chilling when all of a sudden all the Avengers vanish except for Iron Man, Hawkeye, Wasp, and Thor. So from that point, Iron Man's like, okay, what the hell is happening here? We literally recruited all these people and now they're all gone. So he actually ends up contacting Major Vance Astro on the dry dock station, asking, what's going on here? And he's like, I actually have found contact with a small, revolving, small orbiting craft around Earth. And Iron Man's like, yeah, let's teleport there. And it's the size of a phone booth, and they're like, how is this going to work? And there's some sort of spatial reality thing that actually opens up, and they end up coming face to face with an old foe, which we've seen in the early Avengers stuff, the Collector, who we've seen in Guardians of the Galaxy movies and stuff like that. But he actually ends up being the person who was doing all this stuff and collecting all these Avengers. And so issue 174, we have the 4 Avengers I mentioned, Iron Man, Thor, and the Wasp, and Hawkeye, taking down the Collector. Iron Man, Thor, and Wasp are easily defeated, and Hawkeye actually remains by himself, which is funny because he really has no superpowers. He has his arrow, so he ends up trying to fight this upward battle of the Collector. Has all these different devices and shit that he throws at them, and he actually ends up stumping and defeating the Collector with an electro arrow, which shorts his body or something. And the Collector admits defeat. So because of that, the Avengers are freed. Thor, Iron Man, and the Wasp come to, and the Collector kind of tells them about what's going on. And he was saying how he was trying to collect all these items to fight Korvac, who or this. He doesn't really say that it's Korvac, but he was talking about this threat that was looming in the future, that he needed to gather all these heroes, all these items to fight against. He mentions the threat of Thanos, and he also mentions that he sent this enemy that he was fighting against. He actually sent his daughter to spy upon. So because of that, by logic, we find out that Karina, the woman that was in the fashion show that got kidnapped by Michael, is actually the Collector's daughter, who has actually fallen in love with Michael at this point, and actually betrays her father, and actually spills the beans to Korvac, saying, look, my father, the Collector, was, gathering all these heroes, gathering all these, items to fight you, to bring you down because of the threat you posed in the future. So just as the Collector explains this all to to the Avengers, the Collector is actually disintegrated right in front of the Avengers, and that's a really weird and scary shit that happens, and that's pretty much how that issue ends. And the Avengers are kind of scared shitless, I guess. So issue 175, we have the Avengers kind of a little uneasy still about what happened with the Collector being zapped, and the Vision kind of thinks about it. He's like, well, if this person who zapped the Collector wanted to kill us, that he would have done it already. So they actually kind of just troll around the Collector's ship, and they find a time machine. And at this point, Two Gun Kid, who actually vanished and was set free after the Collector was defeated, he actually is just like, you know what, all this shit's crazy, just send me back to my own time period, and that's how I get sent back. So honestly, the whole plot with the Two Gun Kid coming back and then him and Hawkeye chilling out in the Southwest somewhere, it's honestly kind of stupid. I mean, I don't really, like, from what I've read, and I could be wrong once I read some more stuff about it, but from what I've read, it doesn't really seem that interesting to me, and I'm kind of glad Two Gun Kid just kind of got sent back to the 1870s, whatever he came from. And then, the rest of the Avengers find this teleportational device which sends them back to Earth, but sometimes not in the ways they wanted to. Like, some of them actually fell from Earth because they weren't teleported back right. So they actually end up getting back to the mansion, chilling out what's going on. And then we cut to Michael and Karina, who, after just being told that, after Karina told Michael about what was happening with her father, Michael reveals himself as Korvac. And, for most of us, we can kind of see that as it, whatever. And, how Korvac is ascending to godhood. So back at the mansion, we have Miss Marvel dropping in to kind of join in with the team. Her and Wonder Man kind of hit on each other a little bit. Quicksilver at this point is back, from vanishing, and he kind of bitches about, his sister marrying Vision because he's a robot. At this point, Quicksilver is kind of a dick. In the early Kooky Quartet stuff, I mean, Quicksilver was a little bit more tolerable, but at this point, like, from everything I read from him, he's never really a good guy. He's always an asshole. We have Iron Man, just discovering that the memory banks for the Avengers stuff has all been, removed because of their, of their ability to lose their security clearances. And, so Iron Man's trying to figure out, okay, well, who was this? I actually don't think the Collector reveals to the Avengers who the enemy was. He just refers to them as the enemy that he was gearing up for. So, Iron Man's trying to figure out, okay, who is this enemy? Who's this person that, is trying to destroy this world? And of all people, Jarvis strolls in and says, hey, Iron Man, why don't you just contact the Guardians of the Galaxy? Maybe they'll know. Maybe they'll have the technology to figure out what's going on here. And, Michael, knowing the Avengers have contacted Starhawk, is satisfied knowing that Starhawk cannot perceive him and that he will therefore not have to kill the Avengers. So, at this point, the Avengers looking to the Guardians, and we all know that Starhawk ran into Korvac, but since I already talked about how Michael handedly defeated Starhawk and erased his memory, Michael is still safe from having to, have any conflict with the Avengers, which, throughout this whole storyline is something that he's trying to avoid. He's trying to just, live on Earth and, free the world from the eternity, free the world from the shackles of, the life they live and the reality they live in. So issue 176, we have, everybody kind of on the lookout for this enemy, trying to figure out who it is, where they're at, and etc. So we have Moondragon, who is I think the daughter of Drax the Destroyer. She's a goddess of Titan as well. She's meditating. She has like psychic kinetic powers, that type of stuff. And she's trying to figure out, okay, well, who's this enemy? She's trying to figure out, for Iron Man. You have Wasp and Yellow Jacket, sending out ants, trying to figure out if they could find anything. And they notice that an unusual storm is coming, and it's psychic in nature. So, the Iron Man feeds all these clues into the computer because I guess that's how it works. You just take a bunch of shit that other people think about and put it in the computer, and they actually find out that the disturbances are coming from Forest Hills. So they're all like, let's go to the Quinjet. And they're like, wait, we don't have a Quinjet because we lost our security clearances. So this is literally the funniest thing in the world. When I read this, I'm like, are you kidding me? I literally laughed out loud. The Avengers all get into actually commandeer a bus, like a a city bus or whatever. And Iron Man goes up and be like, excuse me, sir, we need this bus to get to Forest Hills. And about 30 minutes later, they end up going to the house where Michael Korvac is in. Michael answers the door and allows the Avengers in, and Starhawk's walking in here, and he's like, "Is this a joke? Because this guy's just a regular dude. I don't know what you're talking about here." And it kind of dawns on everyone that Michael is not who he appears, and that this really is someone that we need to take down. And after that, Michael kind of, he realizes that his cover has been blown now, that he pretty much can't hide anymore from the Avengers, and that he must fight them, and that they must die. So Avengers 177 is pretty much just a giant kill fest. Now sitting back real quick, before we get into this last issue, this whole story kind of seems very reminiscent of Infinity Gauntlet for some reasons. Let me just take a quick drink here and I'll talk about them real quick. I mean, the obvious similarity is that you have a really powerful creature coming to life and killing all the Avengers and such, but Korvac's motivations are not as simplistic as just wanting to kill all the superheroes. Same thing with Thanos. Thanos' quest during the Infinity Gauntlet was to, impress Death. Like, he was doing all this for Death. And Korvac is kind of motivated in the same ways by love. Not for Death, obviously, but for Karina. So, I can kind of see this. This is back in 78. Infinity Gauntlet didn't come out till 92. So, you can kind of see here, there might have been, I don't know if Jim Starlin was involved in any of these stories, but I can kind of understand, some themes and some, storylines being pulled from this Korvac saga and, transplanted and put into the Infinity Gauntlet storyline. So I'm just speculating here. I'm pretty sure there is no, there's no inspiration pulled from this storyline, but, we'll get into it as we go along here. So Korvac basically just realizes that, basically tells the Avengers that you guys ruined everything, that because of this battle, that the great powers of the cosmos will now know that he exists and that he won't be able to, reconstruct the reality they live in. So, he talks about how Heimdall will tell Odin about what's happening. Uatu, the Watcher, will know of Korvac's existence and will, possibly step in to prevent the threat like he did with the Galactus incident way back in the Fantastic Four stuff. And Eternity as well will step up to try to prevent Korvac from, spreading like a virus through the body. So, while this is all happening, Moondragon is actually using her telepathy to summon the Guardians of the Galaxy to get the hell over here and help them out. So the battle really starts when the Guardians arrive, and Charlie 27 pretty much just knocks down the door of Korvac's home. And because of that, Korvac is like, well, you guys started this, so I'm gonna retaliate. So the first thing that Korvac does is, with a single blast from his hands or head, I don't know what it is from, he actually destroys Drydock, and the narration says that the Guardians can actually hear Vance Astro screaming as he dies on the ship, which is really crazy, and that actually prompts the next attack where Nikki, the Mercurian, orphan, the last of her race from Mercury, also a member of the Guardians, she actually attacks Korvac, saying that she'll tear his heart out. And the reason why she's so emotional about it is there is a thing going on between her and Vance, and it's not really like out there and like in your face, but you kind of see it, in Volume 1 and then trickling into Volume 2 here. And Korvac, being the strong person he is, he kills Nikki instantly. And then pretty much the bloodshed continues. Korvac kills Quicksilver, saying that he's doing it for Karina's sake. He's not doing it out of spite. The next thing you have Charlie 27, Iron Man, Vision, and Wonder Man, all heavy hitters trying to attack Korvac. And I think he knocks him unconscious. I don't think he actually kills him at this point. Korvac also fires an energy blast at Captain America, who deflects it with his shield, but I think he's actually thrown out a window or something. Thor then jumps in, tries to hit Korvac with his Mjolnir. I think he also gets knocked back too. I don't think he dies yet. Hercules plans to attack Korvac, never gets a chance to. He actually dies instantly. Let's see. Black Panther, during this fight, Iron Man shouts for Black Panther to take Karina hostage because, ultimately Korvac is fighting this, partly because of Karina and his love for her. So Black Panther is forced, by Iron Man to take Karina hostage, and Black Panther's like, nah, bro, I can't do that. That's really dishonorable. It's not in my culture, like my Wakandan culture, to do that. And obviously the person who jumps in to do it instead is Yellow Jacket, because he's like, the hell with honor, I'll do it. And he kind of captures Karina, uses her as hostage, and that doesn't make Korvac happy, and he actually kills Yellow Jacket. Yondu and Hawkeye, we get a nice moment with them, kind of being like, oh, we're both Archmen, let's try to take him down together. So Hawkeye and Yondu try to team up and trying to take down Korvac. They're both killed. Miss Marvel actually gets killed in mid-flight. You have Martinex trying to get some heroes to team up with him to take down Korvac, because he realizes that we can't keep going at him one-on-one. He'll pick us off like they've done with the other heroes. So he actually ends up getting killed. Captain Marvel and then Black Panther follows suit. Black Widow, Scarlet Witch die. Wasp and Jocasta. Skip through this. So at this point, there's not a lot of heroes left. You have all of them pretty much dead, and I think Korvac kind of thinks that too, until he's actually hit by Captain America's shield. And they fight for a little bit. Captain America talks about how no matter what Korvac does, someone somewhere will find some way to take him down, and he actually ends up just killing Captain America. And this is very similar to what we saw in Infinity Gauntlet, Captain America being the last character, because of of how Captain America is, he is superpowered, but he doesn't have an armored suit or a magic hammer or anything like that. Let's see what else. After he kind of destroys Captain America, he kills Wonder Man, and pretty much after this we have, after all this is happening, we have Iron Man, Starhawk, Thor, and the Vision kind of waking up, because they were all just knocked unconscious. They weren't actually killed. And Korvac is blasted by this solar heat, light burst, magnetic rays, living lightning, and Michael realizes that this actually fucks him up, so he's actually on the losing side of this battle for the first time after killing all these heroes. And he looks to Karina for support to help him out with this, and she hesitates. She is kind of shocked by what's happening with this whole battle and how much bloodshed is going on. And because of that, Michael kind of just loses all hope and, kind of just dies, losing the will to live because of his Karina, who, didn't want to step in. And then we get to the next part of this whole battle, where Karina actually, knowing that she just lost her, the love of her life, she, goes on a killing spree of her own, which is a little crazy. She kills Starhawk first because of his interference with this whole thing, dating back to the first time they ran into each other. She then kills Iron Man, kills Vision, and before she can kill Thor and Moondragon, she actually takes Mjolnir and commits suicide. She knows that, I guess, she's no match for Thor and Moondragon, so she kills herself before they even get a chance to fight her. And pretty much at this point, all we have is Thor and Moondragon still alive. And Moondragon has been telepathically looking into Korvac's mind and realizes that Korvac really didn't want to kill anyone. He was just trying to free the world from the capricious whims of eternity, as Moondragon put it. And but Thor kind of retaliates and says, well, then why did he maliciously kill all of us? And she was like, I read his mind, and he actually regretted it the minute he killed Nikki, who was the second person to die in this whole onslaught. So, but as Korvac's dying wish, he actually used his power to restore all the Avengers to life, which is convenient as hell, right? Because we couldn't have all these characters just die in one story. That would suck. So at the end, we have all these characters revived. Thor turns into Donald Blake to kind of help them, and Moondragon uses her powers to erase the memory of what she told Thor about how pretty much the Avengers were wrong for this whole story. Like, they shouldn't have even confronted Korvac in the first place. I mean, he wasn't going to kill anyone. The only reason why he reacted the way he did was because he was prompted to by the Avengers attacking him. So we get another. It's kind of like a few panels or a few pages from, I think, Avengers 178, where the Avengers end up burying Korvac and kind of reflecting on the whole story and what happened. So that's the Korvac saga. So as I said earlier, the Korvac saga really isn't really a saga for Korvac. It's pretty much a bunch of random storylines that just culminate in Korvac. And I'm not gonna sit here and say that it's the worst thing. The storyline. There's a lot of worse storylines that I've read, but in terms of the build-up and what I've heard about this story, it just falls a little flat for me. I feel like the beginning of the storyline kind of started off really cool. The whole thing with Korvac coming back to the past to kill Vance Astro as a boy, I thought that was really cool. It's very reminiscent, I think, of like Terminator kind of stuff. And then, by the time you get to the end of this storyline, you kind of forgotten about Korvac because you had that whole thing with Ultron. You had the whole thing with the Collector, which, looking back on it now is kind of relevant to the story of Korvac, but it wasn't really necessary to explain what was happening. And, again, the whole reason why the Guardians are in this is because of their battle with Korvac at the end. They're really not involved in a lot of the stuff going on in this storyline. So, that's pretty much, why I don't really think it's a great story to read. And not to mention, I mean, Jim Shooter's writing is alright, but, it's very reminiscent of the times. He lays on the text very, very thick. I mean, there's some panels where it's more text than art, and, for an artist as great as George Perez, I mean, it kind of sucks to cover up his art with all these thought bubbles. So, and like speech bubbles. Anyway, so that's kind of my quick thoughts on it. Obviously, feel free to talk about it in the comments, but wasn't really a great story. I mean, it wasn't a terrible story. It was just very meh to me. So, Avengers 181 pretty much just wraps up stuff, and this kind of, the Guardians are returning to their time. Henry Gyrich kind of comes back and, says, I'll give you guys clearance back if, we're gonna give you guys clearance back on a few conditions. You guys have to reduce down to 7 members, and you have to include equal opportunity for minorities. So that kind of gets into what the group of the group of Avengers are at this point. The group that Henry Gyrich picks is Iron Man, Vision, Scarlet Witch, Beast, Captain America, Wasp, and the Falcon. Because the Beast being a mutant, the Falcon being African American. So, and then the rest of the story is kind of setting up another story that I guess follows this issue, which isn't really relevant to the Guardians, so I'm not going to really talk about it a lot. I mean, pretty much what happens is Quicksilver and Wanda collapse for some random reason, and there's this guy that shows up to the Avengers mansion that is holding these 2 dolls that resemble Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, and he says that these are my children. So, I don't know what that means. I mean, I'll probably read the later issues of Avengers stuff at this point when I get to it, if it gets published in another collection or whatever, but for right now, it's not really relevant to the Avengers at all, so or the Guardians at all. So we'll keep going. So that's all the Avengers stuff. So at this point, the Guardians have defeated Korvac. They are back on dry dock. They are pretty much set to go. And kind of head back to Earth. I mean, Korvac has been destroyed, so there's really nothing else for them to really do on Earth at this point. But there are some little side quest things here that I thought were cool, so I'll talk about them. Let me take a quick drink and then we'll get to them. Whew, a lot of talking. We're already at 55 minutes here. Going on an hour. So, Miss Marvel is the first issue that comes after the Avengers issue, after the Korvac saga. And basically this whole issue, we have Carol Danvers coming back from the date with this guy named Sam Adams. I don't know if that was intentional. Sam Adams is a beer. I don't know if that was intentional or whatever. I have never read any of the Miss Marvel stuff before this, but I think there's an Epic collection coming out that will collect some of this stuff, so I'm curious to read it and see what it's all about. She comes home from a date. The guy asks her, or I think she offers him coffee or something to come in. He's like, "Nah, you have work in the morning or something. I have work in the morning. You got to go to bed or whatever." And she's about to sit down and relax when she gets a knock at the door at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and this girl named Salia Petrie actually ends up being at the door, and she's like tired and like fatigued, and she collapses in Carol's arms, and she's like, "What the hell?" And this Salia girl was actually one of her astronaut friends or her flight buddies who actually ended up dying in the same on the same trip that gave Carol her powers. So, actually, I take that back. I think Carol was fighting somewhere, and her friend died or whatever, and she feels guilty for it for some reason. So she ends up bringing Salia in, chilling with her, and she finds out that Salia was actually like a Trojan horse kind of. She actually had powers for some reason, and she attacks Carol and knocks her out, and brings her aboard the dry dock station, which is a little weird because the dry dock station was actually being run by the Guardians at this point. I don't know if they've all come back to the ship yet at this point, but the ship is actually taken over by the Faceless One, which is actually an old character that dates back to it. I think they said that a Tales to Astonish issue. I can't remember for the life of me if I read that or not. So the rest of the issue is pretty much Carol teaming up with Vance Astro, who is still on this ship because he wasn't allowed to go to Earth because of what was happening with Korvac and trying to kill his younger self and disrupting the time stream, etc. So Carol and Vance pretty much team up to take down this Faceless One, who was actually controlling Salia. And they actually end up killing the Faceless One, sending him back, I think, through time or something. And Vance uses his mental powers to free Salia from the Faceless One's control. So the story is really kind of its own story. The biggest thing to take into account here is the Vance Astro still on the ship. I think this takes place, I think from what I've heard, from what I saw in the comic, it takes place like during the time that the Collector is on the ship and the Avengers are trying to hunt him down. It takes place during that time, so I think the Guardians are still back on Earth watching over Vance Astro as a boy. So that's pretty much what that story is about. The next issue we get here is Marvel Team Up 86, which is, like I said, the Chris Claremont stuff. We open up to the DRC, which was this company that was formerly run by Moses Magnum, who at this point is dead, which, if you guys read X-Men during this timeline, Moses died in Japan fighting the X-Men and Sunfire, I believe. And but the DRC is still running strong. It's being run by this other guy. I forget for the life of me what his name is. I don't really care. It's not really relevant. And he has plans to take over the dry dock station, which is still in orbit around Earth at this point. And the Guardians of the Galaxy obviously don't want that. So, their mission is to come down to Earth, destroy all the information and all the plans that the DRC has to take over dry dock. But while they're doing this, a journalist who's actually trying to expose the DRC for their corruptness and their weapons manufacturing takes a picture of Martinex and tries to get away and sell it on to his publisher or whatever. And the Guardians are like, we have to get rid of that picture because if anyone sees Martinex, the Pluvian, if they see his crystal body, it's going to disturb the time stream and all this shit. So they kind of, basically the whole issue is, the Guardians teaming up with Spider-Man to, number one, take down the DRC and its information and weapons that they're planning to use to take down the dry dock system, and to also get this journalist guy who has pictures of Martin X. And they do that. I think Spider-Man gets captured at one point, but the Guardians actually end up bailing him out and helping him take down the stuff. And it's a pretty cool issue. I really enjoyed it. Claremont, it was really good in this issue. I thought his storytelling was pretty good. It's just another little tie-in story. At this point, like I said, I think this is after the Guardians have, met with the Avengers after defeating Korvac, so that's kind of where that fits in. So, that is that stuff. The next 4 issues that we'll get to here, the first 3 here, Marvel 2-in-1, 61 through 62, and 63, are all one storyline. Pretty much, I'll go this really quick. I'm not going to really talk too much about this, but we have in Marvel 2-in-1, number 61, we have a cocoon emerging from the waters of, a bay in the ocean. And the cocoon looks oddly familiar to Adam Warlock's cocoon. And we actually get, someone emerging from the cocoon, flying away, and, during a dinner with the Thing and his girlfriend, Alicia Masters, this creature ends up crashing their date, referring to herself as her. And she needs Alicia Masters, and the Thing is like, I don't know what you're doing here, but you're not taking my girlfriend. She easily beats the Thing, and the two of them escape, Alicia and her. And the Thing actually tries to find out where this chick took his girlfriend, and at the same time, Starhawk, noticing that the Thing is using energy signatures to track where they're at, ends up teaming up with the Thing to go find out what's going on here. And pretty much the end of the issue has her, Alicia Masters, and Moondragon getting onto a ship to go to Counter Earth to find Adam Warlock, because her is actually the perfect mate for Warlock. And it's a really weird origin. I think she was pretty much like the second perfect human built after Warlock was built. And she actually was born as a human, but actually evolved into a woman so that she could mate with Adam Warlock. And it's very Adam Eve-esque kind of storyline. That's pretty much how that is. Marvel 2-in-1 number 62 has, the Thing and Starhawk taking a scroll ship and kind of flying to Counter Earth to meet with the other 3 women that are there. And, as they're flying, the 3 women notice that Counter Earth is missing for some reason, but the artificial moon that orbits Counter Earth is still there. And they know the High Evolutionary is there, so maybe they could talk to him and get some answers. And when they show up to the ship, the High Evolutionary is actually dead. And they notice the Thing and Starhawk are there, and naturally both parties think that the other party killed the High Evolutionary, so a fight ensues. And then Alicia is the one who has to break it up, saying, hey guys, we're not here to fight. We don't need to fight each other. We need to find out what's going on with the High Evolutionary. So they end up reviving him. I think Moondragon helps out with reviving him. And the High Evolutionary kind of explains what happened, with Adam Warlock, how he died, all that stuff. And, what happened with the High Evolutionary before he died. So I think, the Adam Warlock had a misunderstanding with what happened with Counter Earth and actually shot and killed the High Evolutionary, but he transported his soul somewhere so that the Soul Gem wouldn't take his soul. It's really weird. The Soul Gem in general is just a loophole that we see get used a lot in the Marvel Cosmic stuff. But at the end of the issue, we pretty much, the High Evolutionary kind of teams up with this whole party and realizes that his Counter Earth has actually been stolen and is being pulled somewhere else. So, with him and these other people, they kind of hunt down the trail and realize that this group of, aliens are actually using the Counter Earth to sell to this group called the Beyonders. And I think this is before Secret Wars, the event. So I don't know if Beyonders is the same type of people that are in the Secret Wars storyline. I think because it was just one guy named the Beyonder. So pretty much they realized that, you know, that these guys, you know, and their leader being the Sphinxor, that's his name. I'm not even kidding you. He was basically like trying to take this counter Earth to these Beyonders so that they could manipulate it and make it a better world. And high evolutionaries like, I don't have any problem with that. Like, if they want to take it and make it better, we should probably do that. And after they do that, they get down to Earth. The high evolutionaries like, okay, you guys can do this as long as you let these guys go down and take care of what they have to take care of. Which, in this case, her still wants to mate with Adam Warlock, so she goes down to Earth where she goes down to counter Earth where her is buried, or I'm sorry. Her goes down to counter Earth where Adam Warlock is buried, and actually resurrects him and tries to mate with him, but she realizes that he has no soul because the soul gem is actually somewhere else. So she cannot mate with a soulless shell. And so she actually buries him back into his grave and just ends up leaving. So that whole thing was pointless. The Thing is kind of pissed off. The whole reason why this storyline is tied in here is that Starhawk is in it. But Starhawk really doesn't really have a really big presence in it. So that's pretty much what that is. Marvel 2-in-1 which is the last issue here. We're coming up on about an hour and 10 minutes of this podcast. Is pretty much just tying up something else that we have here. So, we open up to the Thing making breakfast for Ben, or I'm sorry, the Thing open up to making breakfast for Sue Storm and her son Franklin when they get a call from Starhawk from the Guardians of the Galaxy saying that Vance Astro has gone AWOL. And, the Thing obviously knows who Vance is, and, he enlists the help of the Fantastic Four to go hunt down where he is. Now, during this time, we actually get young Vance Astro going to school where he runs into his older self, which he doesn't know yet. And this young older self is telling him about how he shouldn't be an astronaut, how he should, embrace his powers. And the young Vance is very scared and runs away. And during this time, there actually is a strange mist forming around New York City. The Fantastic Four go to investigate. And, the Thing actually ends up landing on, near where the center of this whole thing is going on, and finds Vance Astro. And he's like, what's going on here? And Vance kind of explains a story about how he needs to correct the history because he can't have, explaining that his past experience, doing so did nothing more but create an alternate reality. Oh, I'm talking about something else here. But, Vance is kind of talking about how he needs to make sure that his younger self doesn't become an astronaut so that he doesn't become, in this whole, 1,000-year journey that ends up being pointless for him. So because of that, the Thing kind of empathizes with him and, goes to, back to the young Vance's house where they run into the actual Guardians of the Galaxy. Which is kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of funny. Like, the Thing and Vance Astro end up coming back, and the Guardians just chilling in young Vance's house, and a fight ensues, and Vance actually ends up getting his younger self to unleash his mutant powers, which Vance has psychokinetic powers that he uses. So this kind of creates a whole alternate reality, which reading a collection I read today actually leads to Vance Astro becoming Marvel Boy, which is actually in the New Warrior stuff, which is actually kind of interesting. Before Vance was screwing around with his past self, it still led to him becoming whatever, but because of this tampering that he did with the time stream, it led to an alternate reality where Vance became another superhero in his own timeline. So the last thing we see here is Vance kind of getting up to leave, and his father, starts scowling at, Vance Astro, the Guardian character, and Vance is like, "Yo, bro, like I'm your son," and we get a moment here where Vance actually removes his mask, revealing his old, his like 30-year-old self underneath his mask that he was wearing for all this time. And to me, I was a little shocked because obviously we know with Vance is if he removes that any part of his copper suit for any reason, he could age 1,000 years in seconds. And that didn't happen, and it's really cool. They kind of explain a little bit about the technology that was in it, and maybe that's why it didn't age him. And back on the ship, that's pretty much how it ends. So we get, this whole story is kind of centered around Vance. It's kind of him just trying to, Vance is a very conflicted person. He had a lot of baggage with, very disappointed in his life, and feels like his life has been wasted. Traveling through space for 1,000 years, only to find out that, if only to find out, 1,000 years later that time travel was created and he didn't have to do a trip that long. So it kind of ties a nice bow to this whole book, kind of similar to the first one. The last issue of that first volume was a nice storyline about Charlie 27 and his relationship to his father and to the Jovian, colonies and stuff like that. So this one kind of wraps it up too. So, real quick, just to cover all this stuff. Overall, I didn't like this one as much as the first one. But overall, I could really get into this a lot quicker because I wasn't having to learn so much about the characters. Obviously a lot of the Avengers I was familiar with already, and with all the stuff with the Guardians, I was also very familiar with them. So I'm really excited to see where the 1990 series takes this whole storyline backdrop, this whole storyline with these characters. But overall, I thought this was a pretty solid book. I mean, it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't as good as the first volume, but I still thought it was really good. If you're willing to, if you want to read the Korvac saga, I would suggest reading this and getting this book because you do get a little bit more content, and you're probably gonna pay probably around the same price. So it's up to you, whatever you want to do. But so this is the last collection that we have here with just random stuff. So the next collection that we'll do is Jim Valentino #1 or Volume 1. I actually started it today. I'm gonna finish it probably hopefully next week, and we'll do a podcast on that. But that actually starts the Guardians of the Galaxy 1990 series, I believe it came out in. So really excited to talk about that. I was reading the first issue today, and the whole team is pretty much the same, just updated to the 1990s. So, and then they do a really good job in the first issue, kind of recapping the entire history of the Guardians up to this point, kind of recapping everything from these 2 volumes of the Tomorrow's Avengers collections. So really excited to dive into that next week. But overall, this one was pretty good. Like I said, the Korvac saga did not really live up to the hype that I thought it was going to have for me. But overall, good stuff. So, like I said, tune in next time for Guardians of the Galaxy by Jim Valentino Volume 1 podcast. This was the Guardians of the Galaxy Tomorrow's Avengers Volume 2 podcast. Thanks for listening, and have a great week, guys. Bye.